One of the things I will share that around my pond, when it comes to invasive species that I've found, I've never had porcelain-berry before until about 3 years ago. And I know Blake mentioned that, and I know Todd will mention that. It's been a very big issue in the Milford area, but any waterway here in Delaware, especially in Sussex, you can tend to find that, something else called Japanese knotweed, all these things that we need to be sure that even though we may have a great area, again, that constant and occasional checking for invasive species is important, because birds can deliver a lot of, I love having them in my yard, but I have to constantly look and be sure that I don't have craziness coming up alongside those native plants and other plants that I have in my yard.
For the Department of Agriculture, Environmental Program Manager, Noxious Weeds, and the Seed Lab. Today I'll talk about some invasive plants that we deal with, and I'll also have a commercial up front on our noxious weeds. I'll go through them kind of quick. Go ahead, Tracy. Kind of have to get this subject out there. There's been a lot of bad press for Roundup, whether it be Roundup or some other products along that way. The glyphosate, a lot of what I talk about uses these products different ways, and my take on it is I started spraying with this product in 1975. I've had exposure every year, and I'm health-wise fine. So I'll be suggesting it. If you were to go away from it, the products that are available are actually more of a soil contaminant type issue. So we're working in houses and around water, so we have to kind of keep it, keep some of those other products out. Go ahead, Tracy. Our noxious weed program started back in the 70s. Here's an article from 1977. They started with Johnson grass. It's still a problem. It's still a problem across the country and the world. Johnson grass right now is along the roadsides. We're seeing it 4 to 5 feet tall. It's trying to seed out. So we're out. Garrett and I are treating roadsides. DelDOT's treating some roadside spots also. This is one that when there's dirt moved around throughout the state and the region, it could end up around the stormwater ponds. We see it when they do culvert repairs a lot of times. It's one that glyphosate or Roundup works on. There's also some other products that only kill grass. You see in there Select, Fusilade, and Post. They're labeled on field crops and vegetables. For turf and ornamental, we have products called Envoy and Ornamac 170. They're the same as the Select and Fusilade, just in a different labeled product. You're trying to get a product that's labeled for the site you're working on. If this was in your yard and you're mowing weekly, over time it would suppress it and it probably would go away, but the seeds last for several years. So if you let it go to seed, the problem's going to be there for a long time.
So Todd, I think,
pardon?
One of the things I say that if you think you have this, clipping the seed heads off, if nothing else, is important so that we're not spreading.
A lot of times we dig it up if it's a single plant. It has a large root. I'll show a picture of it in a minute. So cutting the seed heads and or digging it up, just make sure you get all the roots when you do that. A characteristic on this grass is a white midrib, which is the middle section of the leaf. If you're confused, sometimes that's an easy way to ID it. Once it seeds out, it's usually 5 or 6 feet tall with a distinct seed head with red seeds on it that birds like to move around. There's a seed head picture. Pretty mature. Once you get to that stage, you've got seed heads going, or seeds that are alive. One of the other noxious weeds is Canada thistle. We have this very serious problem in Kent and Newcastle counties. The issue with it, once it gets to this point, it starts to blow and the seeds move around the state. Garrett went yesterday to some houses in Wilmington, and that's what they had, and they had some other annual thistles. This is one that's very deep rooted and very hard to pull up. We don't usually recommend that because it breaks off and you still have the roots that come right back. That's just the seed rosette stage when it's small in the early spring. It's easy to spray then and control, but will continue to come up because there's more seeds in the ground. So a lot of times we treat in the spring and in the fall. Just a close up of the seed head. When we're doing spraying along the road, we're using the chlorelid products called Transline usually. Stinger is a product for in corn. And in lawns, lawn trail is labeled, but it's very expensive. It's labeled for a lot of shrubbery, but we don't usually have too many people that are willing to commit to buy it because of the price. There's quite a few products for thistle, and it's a constant issue, so we try to do different things to try to manage it. Mowing in early June and early September is a good way to also suppress it. So around your ponds, that might be something to keep in mind. Another noxious weed in Delaware is burr cucumber. This was brought on in '86. It was, at that time, there weren't any controls for it. And it was known for destroying the crop and pulling the corn down, so it was unharvestable. With our herbicide technology in the last 20 years, it's become less of a problem, but now it is around woods areas, pond areas, and streams, because it moves in the water, the seed does. So if you have this one, it could be pulled up or sprayed. Go ahead to the next picture, Tracy. This is the seed head cluster of it, and the little pricks on it, the little things look like thorns. They're where it gets its name of burr cucumber. It's not real friendly if you get it on you. So it can get enclosed, and you'll know you've been around it. And if you notice, it has a little tendril there that helps it climb, and it climbs up other plants and any structures that are around your pond. Okay, Tracy. This one's giant ragweed. Also became a noxious weed in the '80s, and it is very similar to the burr cucumber, where recent year technology has gotten it down to where it's just on field edges, wet areas, along roadsides some. So we mostly treat it with Roundup, but it can get, as you'll see, go ahead, Tracy, on the next picture. It gets very tall. When I started this job in '96, we had fields like this in Delaware, and it was very detrimental to the profitability of the farms. The Roundup technology and other technology in field crops has greatly depleted this weed in Delaware and in this region. And this was just an example of how massive it can get. 5 leaves usually on a leaf of it. Those leaves are bigger than your hand, so just give you a perspective of it. And there's a seed head, it looks like a little crown. And they move around with dirt and equipment and rainwater, so they can spread that way. And you don't see them moving much with animals. Mice like to eat them, but they destroy them usually. One of our more recent weeds is Palmer amaranth. You notice it has some marks on the leaves where it has what they call watermarks, and this is not on all of them. It'll be just a few plants. This weed came into the region as being resistant to Roundup or glyphosate. It's a plant that has male and female plants, and these are the seed heads on them. The females, if you were to grab that top, have spikes on them, and you'll know the difference. The males don't have the spikes and the females do. These plants are able to produce up to 1.5 million seeds per plant, and the seeds are about the size of ground pepper. Just an example of how bad it can get in Delaware. This was a few years back in a soybean field. Those are about 6 feet tall, maybe 7. Just another example of the seed heads on it. This is a picture of a male Palmer amaranth on the left and a red root pigweed on the right. They're both in the amaranth family. And until they get to this stage, sometimes it's very hard to ID the difference. We have red root pigweeds have been here for years, and we struggle to control both of them now. Before I get onto this one, the Palmer amaranth is coming up along roads and moving in dirt and construction sites. So we're struggling to keep it from moving around the state at this point. This is a picture of a harvested cornfield, probably early September, and what you're looking at, the green material, is Texas panicum. This is also a noxious weed in Delaware. It's just an example of how a weed can take over in a few years a whole field. This is down in Millsboro, where it's the dryland corn, and the corn crop was very stressed that year, and by the time they harvested, the weed had taken over the whole field. And I'm starting to see this more along roadsides and construction sites also. Just a comparison to regular crabgrass that you would have in your yard. Texas panicum to me is like crabgrass on steroids. It's not real hard to control. It's just it takes extra treatments and more money. So that's never a good thing. Just to show you the difference in the massiveness of the roots of the Texas panicum versus the crabgrass. Another picture of Mark Van Gessel when we were introducing this as a noxious weed in the state, just showing how vigorous it is if it gets enough water. I'll get into more of the invasive plants that we have in the state. This picture is not here, it's just one I borrowed on kudzu. We have about 30 spots in the state, and this is what it can do if it's left unattended. Garrett and I and Blake, when he was here, we've been treating some spots over the last 10 years. We kind of try to get one killed and move on to the next because it is labor intensive. And we use the chlorfluoride on it usually to try to leave other plants. This is what it was brought into the area. People like the smell of the flower. And back when I started here, they said it wouldn't germinate here, but we've since picked seeds off of it. And we've had it grow out in the seed lab, and it will grow in Delaware and make seeds. A lot of times the sites we see, it was brought in from Pennsylvania from a stone pile or a lime pile. One spot person brought it from their child's house in the Carolinas 60 years ago. So, and been pecking at it. It's very hard to kill with not using too strong of chemicals around a house site. It brings into it what we try to do with it, and porcelain-berry is once it gets up on a tree, to cut it off the trees and separate it and have it down on the ground to treat it so that you're not killing the trees, because you can definitely do that with the herbicides we're using on it. This was a patch in Felton that we treated in '99 when we started messing with it, and believe it or not, I'm still treating it every year. It's down to about 1%. It just doesn't want to go away. We've had people pass away and the sites have been left neglected, and kind of Roundup works on it, or glyphosate. We use the trans line, not use the escort or the milestone due to being more soil activity with those chemicals. And we, use a higher rate than what you would use to spray yard weeds around your sidewalk and things like that. A lot of times we treat with transline in the spring and the Roundup in the fall. That seems to be the best that we can do. We also are cutting the large stumps and painting them with Roundup solution on the base. And that's considered a cut stump treatment. I'll talk more about that on some of these other weeds. Like I say, that's me or not, cut the trees off the vines, save the trees. Only spray the kudzu when the leaves are dry. They seem to keep a lot of water on them. So you want them to be dry when you're spraying. Cut and paint the large vines, I said that already. If you've got a spot around the pond that has this, you need to use aquatically approved herbicides that are for near water. A lot of times if it's out on a flat piece of ground and there's something there that makes a little pile, you have to spray both sides. One side won't kill it all. We usually go back 1 to 2 weeks later and retreat any missed spots. And always want to add a surfactant that's approved for the site, whether it's an upland site or a wetland site. And this is one where you don't want to believe everything you read on the internet. I've seen some bad information out there. So talk to somebody that knows their herbicides and has some experience with it. Let's see. One of the things we get into with these vines and invasive plants is to not spray over your head. I'll get in and talk about bamboo here in a minute, and that's one thing you don't want to treat it because it's too tall. We cut it off and treat the base. When you're dealing with any of these invasive plants, watch out for what I call varmints, groundhogs, snakes, anything with holes and things that can be dangerous as far as falling down and tripping. And if you've got 4 or 5 property owners involved, you want to get them all involved and make sure everybody's on the same page of what you're trying to accomplish. One thing is to not forget goats on kudzu. They like it quite a bit. It's a legume, and they'll eat it pretty good and get it down. And once they get it to the ground and keep it down, it starts to starve the roots of it. We get a lot of calls on kudzu and bamboo. We go out to the bamboo sites because everyone's different. We did have a federal grant a few years ago that had us spraying the kudzu, and we're kind of working on old money and trying to keep it going just what we can with the money that we have. With bamboo, it is one that's always way too tall. So one of the methods is to cut it off and paint full strength glyphosate on the stump. And the papers that we hand out recommend doing that within 15 seconds. And that is probably the most critical part of it. The stumps heal over fast. But it's best to do this in the fall. Plant at that time of year is taking nutrients out of the stalks and leaves to keep the rootstock going. So in the summer, in the spring and the early summer, it's not doing that. It's making leaves. So you're kind of going along how the herbicide works and how the plant's functioning. One thing that people don't realize with bamboo is it is a grass. A lot of times brush killers that are advertised don't work on it because it is a grass, and brush killers don't kill grass most of the time. So you have to make sure you're using the correct herbicide and methods to control it. I talked about the cut stump method in the 15 seconds already. The other method we use is to cut it off and let it regrow and treat it with glyphosate after the leaves open. A lot of times when it's real small, the leaves are still rolled up and it won't take it in. It has to go through the leaves. If you cut it a month or so ago, you might have enough growth to treat this fall. For the folks that don't want to use any herbicides on it, you cut it and cover it with tarps, make it so that there's no light getting in. This is a very time-consuming thing. It has fair results, but it may take up to 2 years. I don't recommend burning the stalks. I did that once. It's about like tire fire. So don't suggest that. It may take several years to kill all the roots and the runners that you can't see under the soil. And a lot of folks talk about putting in barriers around it to contain it, and I've seen them fail quite a few times. You spray it in the spring. There are some other herbicides, but it's very technical, and I don't usually get into that too much. It's expensive, but you also still need to cut it off. So we like to treat bamboo in the fall. One that's been mentioned a couple times today is porcelain-berry. I live in Milford, and it happens to be the capital of Delaware for that. They had a grant back a few years and sprayed a bunch of it, and grant ran out, and we quit spraying it, and now it's all back. But it is definitely one you want to separate from your desired trees because it will grow over them and kill them. The birds love the seeds, and that's what's moving it around. Up here at the department in Camden, the facilities guys kind of got behind this year with everything going on with COVID, and our yard where we have beds is full of this stuff. So it's definitely spreading through the region. If you don't know what the vines are that are on your property, you need to find out. You could have some wild grapes that look similar to this, but they don't get the little porcelain colored berries. Roundup is not overly effective on porcelain-berry, even the small ones. That's a picture now of some that's grown up on a tree. We use the brush killers added with that to control it. But it's an ongoing thing. You know, my yard at home, I've had to limb up my holly trees because the birds are sitting in the holly trees depositing the seeds, and I didn't want to get rid of my holly trees, so I've limbed them up so I can spray underneath of them. This picture of a white mulberry. It's another one that the birds deposit quite a bit of, and a 1 to 2 foot tree like this, you probably won't be able to pull it out. It'll have as much root as it does above the ground. So a lot of times I'll take and cut it, paint it on the base with a cut stump treatment of Roundup or a glyphosate product. But this one here is one that spreads quite a bit around the area. Couldn't resist putting this goofy looking picture of some Bradford pears that have been topped real hard. You know, of course, it's springtime before they leaf out. But Bradford pears have become a tree that have spread through native areas and roadsides. This past year, DelDOT has done some what's called basal trunk treatments, and they've killed quite a few along there. But this tree spreads a lot of places, and I know it's growing around the stormwater ponds. If any of you have them in your yards, you know once they get heavy, they will break, and they're something that we need to get away from planting and try to change what we have to things that are a little bit more durable. Don't know how well glyphosate works on it. We usually use the Triclopyr products, which are your brush control products, Garlon 4 or Garlon 3A. Something that's become in the big limelight lately is because of the spotted lanternfly. The tree of heaven is the host plant that they like to stay on. So our spotted lanternfly group that's trying to suppress it in Newcastle County is doing a lot of controls where they're killing this tree off. We had a unique thing happen yesterday. A lady called in and said she had poison ivy all over her yard, and it happened to be tree of heaven. And as this sprout coming up, they are very similar looking. Garrett went out and looked at it, and needless to say, in Wilmington, she had spotted lanternflies on her trees. But on my property in Milford, I found this 2 years ago, and with this one, sometimes with it being tall, they do what's called a hack and squirt method, where you take an axe and cut around the base of the tree and put the herbicide right in there. And I killed probably 10 trees last winter, so it worked pretty good. That way you're not getting it on the soil. Chemicals going directly in the plant, and you're also killing something standing. So the ones I did are in an area where they can fall down when they deteriorate. But if you're seeing this weed with bugs on it, you want to call the Department of Agriculture here, ask for the spotted lanternfly group, and let them know what you've got. That's been in the media quite a bit and on social media also. Put this on here just so that you do know exactly the plant you're treating. There's some similar lookalikes, tree of heaven, but a walnut tree also looks very similar. One thing there, the tree of heaven has a distinct odor, which is not very pleasant. If you nick the bark or crush the leaves, and you would smell that. And a walnut, it has another distinct odor. They're totally different. So on any plants, make sure you know what you're working with, and make sure your herbicide that you're using has that plant on the label. Something that we haven't found in Delaware, and we really don't want to, is giant hogweed. This is a picture of two guys working on it, and you notice how they're suited up. This plant has a sap that causes skin injuries. And those skin injuries can develop into skin cancer. So it's one that's kind of monitored quite a bit. We go out if people think they have it. Cow parsnip looks a lot like it. Leaves on the giant hogweed are about 5 feet across, and cow parsnip are about 2 feet across. And it's not quite as tall, but they are similar. This plant is in Maryland, so you know we keep an eye on it, and we do respond to anybody that calls in. It'll make the news once in a while. Virginia, I think, was the last time, and then we get a lot of calls after that. But keep your eyes open for things that you're not sure what they are. If kids get in this and get it on them, it can be very detrimental, health and adults also. We talk about manually pulling giant hogweed. I'm not doing that. You know, just it's too much chance of getting it on you. Girdling the plants, you know, that's another thing that I'd rather use a herbicide versus be that close to those plants. I know how hard it is to keep poison ivy off of you when you're working on trying to kill it. Tillage of the area, burning, spraying and cutting the stumps, using a wiper to cut it. The hack and squirt, I talked about that a little bit. That's where you do the base and around it with some herbicide. And a basal bark treatment is usually a spray, which you have to get all the way around the base. and tarps and plastic covers. I guess this really wasn't all about hogweed. This is kind of just general information on how to control things. I usually recommend the herbicides because I've been doing it so long, but there are other methods that will work as long as you're patient. And just like Blake, I have a couple dogs in my house, and I'm sure they're napping right now. But if there's any questions, I guess Tracy can pull those up. And sorry for the inconvenience of me having so much trouble with being high tech.